Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I am here with you guys to tell you my top favorite books that I read in 2024. This is my favorite video to film every single year. I've got my notebook, I've got my pen, and I'm ready to dive into it. Now, 2024 was an excellent reading year for me. I've heard other people talking about it, how it wasn't for them, but this was really a golden reading year for me. I discovered a bunch of older books that I really loved, read a lot of new releases that I really loved, just all around. I've got no complaints. So we're going to get into these. Originally, it was going to be 10, my top 10 favorite. Couldn't cut it down to that few. Then I was like, okay, 12. That's a good number, you know? It's half of 24, and it's 2024. Plus, it's like one book per month. And I was like, yeah, that's good. That is good. So I stuck with that for a while, and then I remembered I had forgotten one. So what we're working with here is the top 12, but from one author, there's 2 books on this list. So we're counting that as one spot in the list. And I'm sticking with it. So these are in no particular order, aside from the top 5. Those are my top 5. All the rest are just, I loved them all. These are all my sweet book babies that I loved so much, and I can't wait to tell you all about them. So the first one we're going to talk about today is actually a collection of short stories. This is a new to me author. I knew nothing about the book going into it, but I really, really loved it. There were a lot of stories in here that really impacted me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and isn't that always so exciting? And that is Death by a Thousand Cuts by Shashi Bhatt. And these stories are all kind of told from the point of view of a woman, different women, of course, but from women. And a lot of them are just kind of slice of life stories, but there's something about the way that they're written. And in one particular story, she talks about having a chronic illness, the character does. And that story in particular was a standout for me. So if you are looking for a stellar collection of short stories in which every story is a hit, this is the one. This is the one. It's so good. It's so good. Next up, this one I think came out a couple years ago, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I read this for my podcast this year. I hadn't really had any interest in picking it up before that until it was chosen as a podcast selection, and I loved it. This is about 2 people, a guy and a girl, and they meet when he's in the hospital because he's sick, and she's there because her sister's in the hospital. And she meets him when he's sort of sitting in the game room playing video games, and they eventually get to talking. And that's kind of a big deal because this kid hasn't spoken to anybody since he got to the hospital, the nurse tells her. And from there, they develop a friendship that spans over many, many years. And eventually they even go into business together, developing video games, because that's a passion of theirs. And it's heartbreaking, and it's moving, and it's so good. And I'm sure you've already heard about this because, like I said, it's been out for a couple of years, but would highly recommend. This was another 5-star read for me. All right, next up we have Small Town Horror by Ronald Malfi. This was my first book by this author that I've read, and I saw it on NetGalley months ago, and I'd heard people talking about this author so often. I'm a part of a few horror Facebook groups. I was gonna say face group books. But I just never gotten around to picking it up. So when I saw it, I grabbed it and I loved it. Basically, this is one of those stories about someone who returns to their hometown after many, many years because something has gone awry, and he needs to go back because the group of friends that he grew up with, things are happening in this town, and he needs to get to the bottom of it along with his old friends that he hasn't spoken to in years. Not an incredibly unique premise, but done so incredibly skillfully that it scared the pants off me, and I would definitely recommend. After that, we've got My Husband by Maud Ventura. This book is a ride. It takes you for a ride. It's about this woman who is married to her husband, and she's obsessed with him, but like not in a good way. Not that obsession is ever a good thing, but like specifically this one, it's not in a good way. She's obsessed with him to the point that she picks apart everything he says and he does, and she is often quite upset with him. And I think it's a week in her life when she's just trying to figure out, she keeps thinking that he's on the verge of leaving her, and then there's a twist at the end that I didn't see coming at all, and I really enjoyed it. It's not often that a twist will completely take me off guard, and I heard other people saying they did see it coming, but I didn't. So loved it. She's an unlikable character. If you don't like that, you probably wouldn't like this, but I loved it. There's a scene where, like, just to give you an example of like the crazy we're dealing with here, there's a scene where they're at a dinner party and like everyone's going around, and like the thing is, I think it's a fruit. If I was a fruit, what fruit would I be? And so her husband, who always remains unnamed, he's just my husband, he says another woman at the table is like, I don't know, some more exotic fruit, and then she's like a clementine or something. I can't remember the exact fruits. But it enrages her, and she obsesses over it, and it is wild. Next up, this is another one that I read for my podcast, THC Library, and this one was such a surprise hit, and I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read more from this author. And that is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. This, I guess you would call romantasy, maybe. And it's not a genre I typically read, but this was so much fun. It was so much fun. It's exactly what the title tells you it is. This woman whose name is Cinnamon, right? Is this Cinnamon? Yeah, Cinnamon. And she works on her family's spice farm. And one day she's like walking home from a night out at the local tavern, because it like takes place in like an unspecified, like sort of medieval type of time. But like the jargon they use and the slang they use is modern, which was so funny. And Krista and I both loved that so much. So anyway, she's walking home one evening from her night out at the tavern with her friends, and she ends up coming across a demon who needs her help. And from there, it just goes on, and she ends up going on an adventure with him because he's got some things to do and he needs a hand. And it was a ton of fun. Next up, we have All Fours by Miranda July. The reason I even picked this book up was because one of my favorite musicians, Lucy Dacus, rated this 5 stars on her Goodreads. And she said, Miranda July, I'm paraphrasing here, I think, makes me feel as if it's okay to exist. Something like that. And I was like, girl, you got me. I'm also going to read this. And it was excellent. It's about this woman who's in her 40s, and she's kind of having a midlife crisis. And one day she decides she's going to road trip because she wants to be the kind of person who takes a map and road trips. She's got to go to New York. She lives in California. She's like, I'm going to drive across the country. And her husband's like, are you now? And she's like, yes, I am. So she leaves her husband and her child behind, and she embarks on this road trip. Only problem is she only makes it about 30 minutes away from home before she gets a hotel and stays there for the entirety of her trip, because she sees this young man that works, I think, at a gas station, and becomes like, there's something about him, and she stays put. She stays put. And she's like calling her husband and making it sound like she's still on the road and like almost to New York. In reality, she's 30 minutes away. And then from there she goes, she returns home eventually and has to deal with what has happened and like who she's become on this trip. And I thought it was excellent. It's definitely weird, and it's definitely a little like off-putting at parts, but there's also something that feels really authentic about it, and like just really beautiful, despite its like sometimes gross and off-putting moments. Those are the moments that make it really feel real, and I really enjoyed that. Next up, we have We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. This book I read months ago again, and it's basically the story of this woman who's at home alone one night, waiting for her wife to return home, when there's a knock at the door. And she answers it. That would never be me. I'm not opening a door if I don't know you're coming. And if you've dropped by as a surprise, I'm not opening the door until you text me that it's you. So she opens the door, and it's a family. It's like a mom and a dad and like 2 or 3 kids. And the dad's like, I used to live here. Like, this was my childhood home. Can I come in and show my family around? And she wants to say no. She wants every part of her screaming, say no, but she says yes, and she lets them in. And from there, it's wild. It was so good. It scared me. And one cool thing is, like, if you go on Reddit after you've read it, there are conspiracy theories and ideas and like theorizing and people talking pages and pages. And it's so fun to like see what other people think. I've heard it's being turned into a movie. I can't wait. Based on the ending of the book, if you've read it, you know, like there's probably gonna be more, like a sequel. And I cannot wait. This was, I believe, a debut. Like, that's crazy. I thought it was so good. I know at this point it's been hyped up a lot by a lot of people, but I went into it completely blind because it was an arc and I hadn't heard a single thing. So I don't know if that lent to my loving it so much because I knew nothing about it, but it was incredible. An easy 5 stars for me. Next up is a book that unfortunately for you doesn't come out until January, but well, I guess we're almost there now, aren't we? I've been talking about this book for so long that I forget, like, you still got a bit of a wait, but we're almost there. So mark your calendars if this sounds good. The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I loved They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. This is completely different. If you're looking for a similar, you know, type of story, this isn't it. But this was so good. This is about 2 figure skaters, as the cover might hint. And they meet when they're very young and they start competing, and it like spans decades of their lives. And the on and off sort of relationship and tension and heat that builds between them throughout this long career in the spotlight. And like, I got so deeply into this book that at one point I was like, oh, I should Google them and see like what they're up to now. And I literally had to stop myself and be like, girl, these are not real people. These are not real people. That's how like well fleshed out these characters were for me. Incredible. Easy 5 stars. I couldn't get enough. Next up, this is a more recent read. This is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This is an older book. I think it came out originally in French in 1992 or 3, but it wasn't translated into English until 2018. So if you've heard people talking about it over the past few years, that's why. This was so good. This is about a group of women, 40 women who are trapped in an underground bunker. I have a whole book talks on all these books. So if any of them sound interesting, scroll around my channel, find them and listen to them. But they're trapped in an underground bunker, like inside a cage. There are men that walk around the cage, but they never, ever speak to them. And like when they first got down there, they try to talk to the men, but they never respond. So eventually they stop talking. They don't know why they're down there. They don't know where they are. They don't know when it is. You know, they're trying to keep track of time as best they can, but like it's really difficult when you're in a cage underground. And one day there's an alarm sounds. And the men who have been guarding this cage for at least a decade, at the sound of this alarm, they take off. Like, no, not a word, they leave. However, when they left in such a rush, the keys were left in the cage because they were in the process of putting the food in. Because like they're keeping these women fed, they're keeping them healthy. Like if they get sick, they're given medicine, but they don't know why they're being kept alive and healthy. So anyway, the keys are left in. he goes running. And yeah, after that, you know, they slowly explore the outside and see what is going on out there. And it's a wild ride. It's a beautiful book. It's incredibly sad. It's incredibly written. And if you haven't read it already, I would definitely recommend. All right, so we are down to the final 3 authors, but 4 books, but 3 authors. So this was a more recent read as well. This is Shark Heart, a Love Story by Emily Habeck. This book is about a world, so you kind of have to suspend your disbelief. It's a world much like ours, only there's a certain disease that can affect you, and it's very rare. But what will happen is there's like a cell mutation that begins, and you can slowly turn into an animal. Many different kind of animals. Some are more common than others. Anyway, we're following Ren and Lewis, and he has recently he finds out while we're reading that he has a very, very rare form of this mutation, and he's turning into a great white shark. And the book is in 3 parts, and this ripped my heart out. It ripped my heart out. What it becomes in this first part especially is what it means for a married couple when they're given a life-changing diagnosis. What it means for him as the person who's been diagnosed, but also what it means for his wife, Ren, who's the caregiver. And it will rip your heart out. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to say too much, but if that sounds like something that might be topical in your life or something you would be interested in reading about, definitely check it out. Next up, you know I would be remiss if this video did not contain at least one Stephen Graham Jones book. This video, in fact, contains 2 Stephen Graham Jones books because I could not narrow it down to pick one. Like, that's not true. I could. I knew which one would be the one if I had to pick one, but I didn't want to because I also read this one, Mapping the Interior. It's very slim. That's why I was like, no, you can put that in it. That's so short. Stephen Graham Jones has become one of my favorite authors. I'm currently getting ready to start mucking through his backlist, of which there are so many books. I'm so excited. Is there anything more exciting as a reader than finding an author you love who has a ton of backlist books? I don't think so. This novella is a story of grief. It's about a young boy who is, I think he's 13 or 14, and he lives in a house with his mom and his brother. His dad has died, and he's grieving, and he thinks he sees the ghost of his father. And that's really all I can say because it's so short. I can't say anymore. If you like grief horror and you like Stephen Graham Jones, then definitely read this if you haven't already. It's the kind of story, the ending shook me so hard. It got under my skin so deeply. I think about it every day. It's so good. That's all I'm going to say. You read it. Now, the next Stephen Graham Jones, and this book that I'm going to tell you now, and the one that's in the number 1 spot, I kept going back and forth, which is number 1, which is number 1. They're both so good. Like I said, my book babies. How do you pick? So I went in this order. Next is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This was so good. This came out this year, I think over the summer, or else that's when I read it. I don't know if that's when it came out or when I read it, but I had an art copy of it. This is exactly what the title sounds like again. It's a coming of age story told through the eyes of a teenage slasher, which might sound like kind of like campy, and like it is, but it's so good. It's so good. The way that Stephen Graham Jones tells the story is unlike anything else I've ever read. Like his ability to tell a story is unparalleled, in my opinion, in this generation or perhaps any other. It's so unique. And I loved this book with my whole heart. So good. I don't even have a physical copy of it yet. It's on my list. I'm going to be getting one soon because I had an e-arc of it, but I need it on my bookshelf, and you do too. You do too. That is, if you've read Stephen Graham Jones before and you liked him. He has a style that isn't for everybody. He writes in a way that's very conversational. Like you're reading it and you're like, that's exactly the way someone would speak. And it's so good. It's so good. If you haven't tried Stephen Graham Jones before, I would suggest this one or this one. This one's short, so you can find out if you like his style or not. And I think I Was a Teenage Slasher will be the one that's like the most palatable to the most people. The final book that I guess I'm calling my top read of the year is American Rapture by C.J. Leede. I had heard of C.J. Leede before because I've heard of Mayfly, of which I got a copy for Christmas, and I cannot wait to read it. So everyone was talking Mayfly, and I was like, I don't know, like the cover kind of grossed me out. And of Mayfly, this one's beautiful. Mayflies is beautiful too, but just also disgusting because of the teeth and the eyeballs. Anyway, so I kind of just put it off. I was like, whatever. But then when I saw American Rapture up for grabs on NetGalley, I requested it, and I was obsessed with it. It is so good. It is so good. This is about a young girl who, like, this is so many things. This is grief horror. This is religious trauma horror. This is pandemic horror. So there's a pandemic, and it's incredibly deadly. When you get it, it causes your, like, you start acting very strange, very sexual in nature. And so our main character, she like goes to a religious school. Like, she's not being told anything about the pandemic from her parents or her teachers. Her brother's been sent off because he's, like I said, her parents are very religious, and they're like, we can't deal with this kid. So they send him off. She doesn't know where he is. Eventually one day something happens and she has to hit the road alone. And it's about found family, and it's about finding the people who you are going to put your faith and trust into to help get you to safety. And she's trying so hard to find her brother. And there are points in this I was sobbing. I was sobbing. I had to go back and read parts to Ed. I was like, you need to hear this. And I'm sobbing and reading it to him. He's like, why do you do this to yourself? I was like, I love it. I love the sadness that comes from reading these sort of gut-wrenching things. He doesn't get it. He thinks it's weird, but that's okay. That's okay. Anyway, you guys, those are my top 12, but really 13 favorite books of 2024. Please let me know in the comments down below, what was your favorite book that you read this year? Your top favorite. Let me know. I will add it to my list so I can read it too. And I hope you guys had a great Christmas and that you have a wonderful New Year. I can't believe it's almost New Year's already. And I'll see you again soon with some more book-related content. I've got a spoiler-free book review coming up soon for a book called The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus, which, so far as I can tell, has nothing to do with octopuses. Octopi? And then in early January, I'm going to be having my December reading wrap-up. I didn't read a ton of books this month, if you want to know the truth of it. We were doing Vlogmas. I wasn't reading a ton. So I'll see you guys soon. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please join the memberships on this channel if you're interested. No pressure, of course. We're going to be doing our first book club session. I started the members in December, but it got kind of rocky because of the holidays. But January, we're coming in strong. So thank you guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye.